.4. I'm Mr. Green, and this is Crash Course History. Today I'll be telling you about the atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan, why they were used, and what happened because of it.
Mr. Green, is this going to be one of those episodes where you go on tangent about how terrible the war was?
Yes, me from the past. Yes, it is. World War II was a brutal and violent time for the world. Lots of new technology was being developed and used. One new technology that changed warfare was the nuclear bomb. In 1939, scientists in the USA, England, and Germany informed their governments that it was theoretically possible to make an atomic explosion. In 1940, two American physicists published an account of the process, so there was no secret about the principles behind the bomb. The problem was to apply them. It was in Britain that an atomic bomb was first seen as a weapon which could win the war. The US and Great Britain started putting money towards developing an atomic bomb around 1941. By 1945, the US had made an atomic bomb that used uranium and plutonium. This bomb was then used to end the war via dropping it on two of Japan's major cities. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To understand why the bomb was used, we have to look at the effects that large land battles had on the European front. Thanks to our guys in tech, we have this video clip for you. Imagine how these soldiers felt when they heard the enemy planes coming around for another pass, or when they were 2 feet from being burned alive, or when they saw the bullets flying past them, praying that they aren't hit, and wondering if they'll ever see their families again, and even if they do, will they ever be able to sleep at night or get the images of death and carnage out of their heads. That being said, it was much easier and less violent to drop the atomic bombs than to launch a ground war in Japan. Dropping those bombs actually saved lives, and the US even dropped flyers into the cities before the attack, warning them of an incoming strike. Don't get me wrong, there are many horrible effects of dropping the bombs.
Newsreel cameras in pilotless aircraft record every movement as displaced water rises like a vast, mysterious forest. Below are man's mightiest ironclads and war vessels, dwarfed and toy-like in a boiling ocean. If lasting peace cannot be created except by fear of the atom bomb, then let us be afraid. 5 bombs, 5 warnings.
But it was definitely the lesser of two evils. This led to the surrender of Japan just 3 months after the suicide of Adolf Hitler and the defeat of Germany. The war was finally over, just like this segment of the video. It's time for an open letter. Let's see what's in the secret compartment, shall we? It's a V-2 rocket used in World War II by the Nazis. Dear V-2 rocket, you didn't work well, and I'm going to tell you why. Let's start at the beginning. During World War II, the Nazis had a program where they developed the first long-range missile in the world, called the V-2 rocket. Production of the V-2 rocket was led by a Nazi named Wernher von Braun, who went on to be a member of NASA in the midst of the Cold War. The rocket used a liquid propellant and was designed to attack the Allied cities without the use of planes. This was huge, as they were able to launch attacks onto other countries without endangering the Air Force. This would have been a huge advantage if the rockets would have been able to hit their target consistently. With around 3,200 rockets launched, there were only about 2,800 deaths due to the rockets. This was because most of them had navigation malfunctions or would blow up in the air before reaching the destination. The biggest problem with the V-2 was the same as many other Nazi technologies. For example, the land cruiser P-1000 Ratte. This megatank was much too big and heavy to be effective, so heavy that it would collapse bridges when driving over them. The V-2 rocket was also much too big to be effective. The technology they had at the time couldn't support a rocket that size. It seems that the main problem with Hitler's war machines was that they were just too big. Maybe he was compensating for something. Sincerely, John Green.
World War II ended, the Cold War started, and didn't officially end until 1989 when it was declared to be over at the Malta Summit. So what was the Cold War, you ask? And why was it so cold? The answer is that it wasn't cold because of Russia's Nazi-killing winters, but because there was never any real battles between the US and Russia. The war consisted of them competing for influence in the world through their militaries, their control of other nations, satellite states, and their top-secret operations unnoticed by the public. One event of the Cold War was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
In response to the failed American-sponsored invasion of the Bay of Pigs by Cuban exiles, Fidel Castro looked to the Soviet Union for support, resulting in the installation of Soviet missiles in Cuba in 1962.
This was when Russia sent ships to Cuba, so if we attacked them with missiles, they'd be able to retaliate faster. Thankfully, this event was resolved and nuclear war was avoided.
The Soviet Union agreed to dismantle the missile bases in exchange for an American pledge not to attack Cuba, and the tactic understanding that American missile bases in Turkey would be removed. TCMC, 1962.
Proxy wars were set up between the Soviet and US through other countries, one of them being Vietnam, which we dropped a bunch of chemicals and explosives on. Anyway, the Cold War ended and now the nuclear threat has more recently moved to places like Iran and North Korea, although at the moment North Korea seems to be steering away from that path. But there are some pros to having nuclear technology. For instance, the nuclear reaction has been providing power for us for years. We just need to limit the manufacturing and use of nuclear weaponry and move forward together as a species. If the V2 rocket was to work consistently, the outcome of the war would have been completely different. Sadly, though, the technology didn't exist at the time. The Nazis would have been able to destroy London and take out important military bases on the coast. This would have allowed them to invade England much more easily. This also would have made it much harder for the Allies to launch a mainland attack onto Germany, and D-Day probably never would have even happened, because all of Europe would have belonged to Germany. Germany then would be able to focus entirely on Russia, and they probably would have won with the aid of the V2 rocket. This rocket could have changed the outcome of the war, and history would be a lot different, as the Nazis would have been able to take the entire Eurasia. That being said, let's check in on me from the past. How you doing over there?
ほんとバカだな。死ね。
Glad to hear it. See you next time on Crash Course History.